Does this one equal these ones? That's what we're gonna find out about today. Hi everyone! So today I have a product that I am very curious about, and that is the Spectrum Noir TriBlend. And what is so interesting or unique with these ones is that you get 3 color tones in one barrel in the same marker. So you get a light tone, a mid-tone and a dark tone. And this is so that you will be able to blend the colors more easily, hopefully. So with the 24 pens that comes in this box, you will get over 72 colors in total, which is pretty awesome. I can imagine it will save you a lot of space too. And the box is a little broken. Now anyone can color and blend like an expert. It's easy. Yeah, that is what we're gonna find out about today, how easy these are to use. These ones actually reminds me a little of the chameleon markers, if you remember those, where you had this like mixing chamber thing and you got this light to dark gradient that was very hard to control. So this TriBlend marker seems a lot more clever, to be honest. So here we have some instructions how to blend the markers to achieve a smooth blend, which is very nifty because if you're new to markers, it can be a bit hard to know how to blend them. I know I struggled a lot in the beginning, so this is really great. So here we have the markers and they come wrapped in this plastic, and I have actually opened one of them so I could take a sneak peek what they look like. My first impression of these markers, wow, it is chunky, oh my. Most of the Spectrum Noir markers that I've tried have this hexagon shape, and I'm gonna be honest, I am not a huge fan of the hexagon shape. It makes the marker very clumsy. It makes it a bit sharp in your hand with all the edges. I don't know, it is just a bit clumsy to hold, especially if you have smaller hands like I do. Just look at it compared to a Copic sketch marker. It is huge and it won't even fit in frame. So on the marker we have the color codes light, mid-tone and dark, and apparently this piece is 1 marker and this piece is 2 markers. So I don't know if that is why it has to be a bit chunky to fit in the ink in these small pens, and they're so cute, they're so adorable and short. So these markers only got bullet tips, which I can imagine can be a bit tricky to color in larger areas with when you have a chisel nib or a brush nib. It is much easier to fill in a larger area and to get a smooth, even color. So it's nothing wrong with bullet nibs, it is just a bit more tricky to fill in larger areas with them. You can actually see the different color tones on the outside of the marker, so that is pretty neat. So now I just have to unwrap all of these markers and then I'm gonna do some swatching. If you're planning to get these markers, be prepared for a lot of plastic waste. Alright, so let's start with this dark red color. I don't know if you noticed, but it is a bit squeaky. So here we have the dark red color, and I first did the swatches individually and then I tried to do like a continuous gradient. Even if I didn't put that much effort into blending the colors very nicely, it does actually create a pretty decent gradient. So yeah, so far so good. So I'm just gonna go ahead and swatch the rest of the colors and we'll see what they all look like. Here we have all of them. My first impression is that there are a lot of color tones that are very similar, and also there isn't a lot of darker tones. There is barely any difference between some of the light and mid tones and some of the mid and dark tones. I would actually call most of these tones mid-tones, to be honest, because there aren't really any super light colors or super dark colors. I think the best gradation with a clear difference between the different tones is actually the dull green, because you can clearly see a light color, a mid-tone, and a fairly dark green. Also, there's no black or blender pen, just so you are aware, but I think it would be pretty cool to have a dark gray to black gradient though. Following the instructions on the box to get a smooth gradient, I started to fill in the whole area that I wanted to color with the light tone, then making the shading with the dark tone, then smoothing the dark tone out with the mid-tone, and then lastly smoothing out the mid-tone with the light tone. So there is a lot of going back and forth between the different tones, but that is normally how I work with markers anyway, so if you want to get a smooth blend, that is what you have to do, going back and forth between the different tones, and yeah, it definitely creates a very nice gradient. I also tried to add the tones in order, light, mid-tone and dark, without adding the light tone underneath, so only going back and forth blending the different tones, and that also worked pretty well. And you can of course also blend other colors together, not only the ones in the same marker, which works the best if the colors you're using are fairly similar, but yeah, it definitely works well too, as you can see. So to be able to properly try out these markers, I needed something to color, obviously, and I started planning this video a few weeks ago, and at that time I had just finished watching Stranger Things season 3, and please no spoilers in the comments below. There might be some people who haven't seen it yet and it would be sad to ruin it for them, so no spoilers, please respect that, thank you. Anyways, I really loved season 3, it might be my favorite season so far, and I really loved some of the outfits that Elle wore. Some of the 80s fashion is just so crazy and full of patterns and colors, so I thought it would be perfect to draw Elle and Max together in their colorful outfits so that I could really put these markers to the test. Also, it's been a while since I did some proper fan art, so here you go. And yeah, I struggled a lot with the poses and the face expressions, and I'm also not very used to drawing full bodies, so yeah, I struggled a lot with that. And also catching the likeness of the character was a bit difficult, and transferring it into this cartoony style that I'm using, and I had to redraw it so many times, but I'm actually pretty happy with how it turned out. Elle's face expression is a little on the stiffer side, I think, but that is actually something I kind of wanted, because I wanted her to look a little bit insecure but still happy, since she's still fairly new and a little unused to the whole concept of having fun with friends. So while you're watching me color this piece, let me tell you what I think about these markers, because I have a few opinions. And yes, I will add line art for this piece later, I just prefer saving it for last sometimes, especially when working with markers, because I think the line art turns out a little less stiff when adding it afterwards. Alright, so let's start with the less good things. Number 1. These markers are freaking squeaky and noisy, as you may have heard. And yeah, it may not seem like a big deal, but after a few hours listening to these squeaky noises, it gets kind of old and tiring. I kind of got used to it after a while, but still, it's not a pleasant sound to listen to. It got especially bad when moving the marker faster over larger areas, then they squeaked hardcore. Copics can also make noises, but yeah, not this bad. Number 2, these markers are a little bit uncomfortable. As I mentioned before, the marker barrel is pretty thick and clumsy to hold, and I tend to hold pretty low on the marker, and the many sharp edges just cut straight into the fingers, and my hand just cramped up. And I know it is kind of a Spectrum Noir trademark with a hexagon shape, but yeah, it isn't very comfortable, unfortunately. It does remind me a little of a kid's marker, since it is so big, which is a little ironic since kids usually have smaller hands. Anyway, yeah, not a fan of the barrel shape. It gave me a sore hand, which actually affected the line art afterwards, since I noticed my grip wasn't as steady as it used to be since my hand was a little bit sore and the line art turned out a little wobbly. Number 3, many colors looks the same. I would wish for even more contrast between some of the color tones. Now many of the color tones are very similar. For some of the colors, the light and the mid tones are almost the same, or the mid tone and the dark tones are the same, which I find a little pointless since it is supposed to be 3 tones in one marker. I would prefer the light tones to be even lighter and the dark tones to be even darker for some of the colors, because as I said, many lighter and darker tones are closer to mid-tones, so it is hard to get the deeper contrast that you sometimes want. And yes, you can layer the colors to get deeper tones, like I did for Elle's shirt for example. It is supposed to be a dark blue, I think, which I didn't have, so I had to layer a blue and a purple. I could have added a red to it too to make it even darker, but I didn't really want the red tone in there. Also, it was a bit tricky to color around the color splash pattern on her shirt. I am very happy with that pattern, by the way. I think it turned out pretty cool. But yeah, I did use a purple to deepen some of the shadows, which I don't really mind. I like using purple for shading, but that is what I had to do in this case since I didn't have any other darker tones. Number 4, which is just a minor thing really, but I thought I might as well add it anyway. It was a bit hard to find the colors that I was looking for when having the markers spread out on the desk. You can kind of see the colors on the cap and on the stripes on the side of the barrel, but some colors are very similar, so I often found myself picking up and turning the marker around to read the color name on the cap, so it was a little time consuming, but still not a super big deal. So yeah, that are some of the less good things about these markers in my opinion. So let's talk about the good things, because there are quite a few to be honest. Number 1, they were easy to use. I actually never thought these markers would be hard to use, but I was kind of expecting it to be a bit tedious to switch between the color tones and maybe accidentally using the wrong side of the marker. But honestly, it wasn't that bad as long as I was only using one color or one marker. I had the marker in my hand the whole time and I could just turn the marker around to switch between the different color tones. So instead of having one marker and putting it down and pick another marker up, I could just have the same marker in my hand and turn it around. So yeah, it was very smooth in that way. Sure, I did confuse the dark and the light color sometimes. I accidentally used the dark tone when I was supposed to use the light tone, but what I did to avoid accidents was to keep an eye out for the Spectrum Noir logo on the marker, which is placed on the light end, so I used that as an easy to see guide to keep the ends apart. Number 2, you don't have to worry about finding matching colors because these markers have already done it for you. I remember when I started to collect markers, it could be a little tricky to find matching light, mid-tones and dark tones, especially when looking on cheaper markers with a smaller color range than Copics for example. I always had trouble finding matching pink tones for some reason. So yeah, I think this is really great for someone that might be new to markers overall and are still learning how to blend and such. This can make it a little easier to understand how it works, and also you don't have to think about what tones goes well together because, as I said, these markers have already done it for you. Number 3, durable pen nibs. I have reviewed the old regular Spectrum Noir markers too a long time ago, and I think one of the critiques that I gave was that the nibs were very mushy and juicy, but I do actually think they have fixed it since and that their newer markers got new nibs. But anyways, these TriBlend nibs are much firmer and much more pointy, which I do prefer since you get much more control when making smaller details, and I don't know, it just feels nicer and like better quality. Now, I have only used the TriBlends for this piece and for the swatches, but most of the nibs kept their shape really well. They didn't fray or anything, which is great since it do extend the life of the marker. And number 4, speaking of extended marker life, these TriBlends are refillable, which is awesome. That means if you run out of one of the free tones in one marker, you don't have to buy a whole new marker. You can just refill the part that is out of ink. And you can also get the markers individually if you would want to, in case you don't want a whole set like this. Or if you really like one color tone, you can just buy it as a full-size regular Spectrum Noir marker. And lastly, number 5, since you get 3 color tones in one marker, you will save a lot of space and still get a bunch of colors, so I guess that is pretty cool too. So yeah, that are some of the things that I came to think of while I was coloring this piece, and as I mentioned, I could wish for some more contrast in the color tones, but it is still a nifty idea to have 3 tones in one marker to make it easier to blend, especially for beginners, I think. And when I look at this piece created with these TriBlend markers, it might as well have been made with Copics. I don't think anyone could tell a difference, to be honest. Also, I know it's not perfect, but I am really proud that I drew 2 full figure characters. That is a thing I always thought I sucked at, but I'm really liking this piece. I'm still working on my cartoony style and how to add more expression to it, so I'm just gonna keep practicing. Well, that is all for today. I hope you enjoyed this video and this Stranger Thing fan art. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye!